So let's now look at the next piece, which is what is the shape of the future look like? What are some of the big trends that would help us become more successful, the more successful you part? So here's the good news. The person closest to the job is the one who's in the job. The fact that 77% of the people who are in touch with their employer believe that they'll get the job back as soon as this crisis is over, to me, it's a good news. Now, obviously, there's 23% who are not so sure, and we'll get into some of this as well in a moment. Now, at the service work level, Instacart is looking for 300,000 new people, Amazon 150,000, Papa John 20,000, Walmart 50,000, CVS 50,000. So there's been, a lot of, by and large number of layoffs at the lower end of the economic spectrum. You can see this is a shift of the service economy into serving those who are working from home or staying at home or quarantined or all of those kind of things. So it's not like the job market is frozen, it's just shifting. Now, similarly, as getting ready for this, I started to do a lot of Googling and who's hiring in tech, who's hiring in the Bay Area. And it tells a fascinating story. I mean, the engine of jobs has frozen, but it's starting to shift, and certainly people are being a little bit more cautious. Just like my employer, they're saying, hey, let's be careful, let's not stop hiring, but let's do a little bit more control. So that's another sort of set of good news that a lot of people, particularly at the lower end of the spectrum, let's say if you are somebody who does the Uber or something, you make $100 a day. I mean, this is certainly is an option here that you can look at. So here's some projections that to look at. So what's all this mean? As we look ahead. So I'm going to look at the second row. So you see Q1 was 3.5, actually turned out to be 4.8. Q2, the Congressional Budget Office projecting 40%, which is deadly. But then if the assumption is that starting sometime end of May, June, July, we'll start to return to normal. People will start spending money. Some of these things come back to life. So you can see a significant bump, 23%, and then we start so that in the year was 5.6%. And some timing is everything, but my sense is this is fairly reasonable. And 2021, we get out the growth. And most of the economists I've talked to and everything I've read is by 2022, we are returning to normal as far as the economy is concerned. And but the news that I don't like is that, and this is sort of variable, if you look at the unemployment rate at the end of 2020, 11.4, and 2021, 10.1, is still by historic norms and all the things we have seen in the last 10 years. I would ideally like to see it around 5% or 4% and all that. So I think this is the exact point, is that as much as the economy is improving, people are going to spend money, we might have relapses and all that kind of stuff. But notwithstanding all that, if you go with this set of projections, job market is going to become a lot more competitive. And it's quite likely they're going to be working from home a lot longer. Like Google's already said that end of this year. So the third part is going to become much more critical. Also globally, here's some global forecasts. And on the global basis, again, they're saying global economy originally expected to increase by 3.3%, going to shrink by 3%. And then 2021, it starts to bump up. That's and finally, in terms of the underlying robustness of the economy, the housing prices, which is one of the indicators of the economy, they still look like it's going to be pretty strong. There's some dip, but it's going to pick up again. And some of this has to do with demand and supply. The other part that I don't like about this particular chart is that it's also the home ownership as at the higher end of the economic spectrum. So it's saying people who are middle class up, they're generally are doing well. Below the spectrum, it's a lot more challenges. Another thing, that big trend is that the most interesting, I'm not looking forward to this, the most interesting thing is that I had a chance to, over the last month, read the history of pandemics. If you just do Google and history of pandemics, you'll find articles of New Yorker, Atlantic, and so on and so forth. But every major pandemic, there's been social changes. As an example, when you had the Black Death, the bubonic plague back in 1300s onwards, essentially there was a lot of deaths. I mean, a lot of people died, and the example is of Italy. In northern Italy, the landowners decided to give incentives for people to work and raise the wages. And consequently, the middle class evolved in northern Italy. Now, in southern Italy, they decided to go more colonial route and put them in bondage and all of those kind of things. So they're forced to work for very low wages. And you can see 650 years later, northern Italy is still more prosperous than southern Italy. So these kind of, similarly, the Spanish flu, the most recent one, you know, I know the war sort of followed it very quickly. So a lot of changes took place, but xenophobia, other things happened. And I'm pretty sure even in this pandemic, we're going to see some social structural changes that we don't know what they are. Another big trend to follow is that disruptions will create new winners and losers. It always does. Any disruption, even if it was a pandemic. Here's an example. Look at the company Zoom. The right time at the right place with the right technology. In fact, tech sector generally, if you look at Google, you look at Netflix, you know, here's some losers. The model, the eat all you can buffet model just doesn't work well with. I already showed you the budgets, but I worked for public sector in California for 20 years. You're looking at 5 or 6 years of pain in the public institutions. So, because unlike private sector where all of the other things are going on, you have a lot more options, you can reduce the cost drastically, find new business models. Public institutions have very defined social missions, so they cannot change too many things, but there isn't going to be enough money. I mean, that's another sort of big trend. That's the other interesting trend that I think everybody should note, that we are moving from an industrial economy, industrial age, to a digital economy. This is going to speed everything up dramatically. It's dramatically speeding up. So here's some examples. It's no longer about dating. Bumble allows you to make friends online. Very interesting trend. All that happened in the last couple of months. We all work online. No big deal. Education switched to online. And by the way, there's no new normal. I mean, there's no, well, I guess there's no going back to the same thing. There's a new normal. Actually, I don't like the term new normal because it sort of has the word normal in it. And I know it's a kind of metaphor for something, but it kind of, to some extent, misleads into thinking that it's sort of like normal, but it's just new. That trend accelerated. I can fully foresee that big stores, already Neiman Marcus is going out of business. A lot of other big retails are troubling, but retail stores will be smaller. They're going to become a little bit warehousey for delivery. It just makes sense. Adventure. I mean, if you look at Airbnb, they're offering the online adventure. You can taste wines with a sommelier. You can have an interior design workshop, and some of these are, while certainly a way to keep things going while we are remote, but these are also structural changes that are just creating a new economy, which is acceleration of digital. Fitness. I mean, Peloton's story is that people sort of work, foreseeable for, like our survey said that a majority will wait for 1 year. We're going to get unused to the idea of going to the gym. And once your culture and behavior changes, it's a different world. And by the way, this was going to be my topic. Actually, we switched to this other one. Originally, we had talked about this, but in the background, all of the stuff to do with AI and robotics and those kind of things is happening. It's happening faster, actually. As I talk to my friends, so there are a lot of labor shortages in farms. They're looking for robotics to fill the gap. And so I think there's this other threat that's coming along that, the numbers all over the map, but if you just only follow that by 2030, something or other, about a third of the jobs are impacted. So again, looking at your future and a more successful you have to also ask this fundamental question. Can I tell somebody what my job is? Which means, is it predictable? And is it repeatable? That is, happen enough time that's worth it for somebody to apply AI robotics to it, then you're at risk. If your job is into the creative realm or higher level knowledge job, not to worry about it. And I think also in this, it plays out that education level is going to make a difference. Because generally, to me, the master degrees are going to become or masters are equivalent, or some advanced certificates will become the new norm, because that implies that you have the higher level of cognitive skills. Another big trend, now I know a lot of offices already start to put plastic barriers to provide the social distance, but assuming for a moment that until, let's just say, next summer, till we have the herd immunity, there's going to be only a limited number of people going to work. We have learned already how to work remotely. I mean, there's no issue here anymore. And a lot of companies are starting to talk about, you know what, maybe they don't need as much office space because people are equally productive. The fear of not being able to collaborate and be creative is going away. And if you're going to do this, anything you do for a year or two, it becomes habit. In fact, one of the most interesting scenarios I heard, that what about all these major companies who are building these mega campuses? What if they were to convert part of it into housing? And essentially, yeah, you want group work, you can walk across the street to the conference room, but then you go back into your apartment and work from there. So even to me, there are significant implications to the housing crisis they were facing. If the conversation is starting, I'm sure people are starting to think about it, that if you're going to reduce the office space requirement, maybe let's talk about how we put the productive use. Certainly, co-working spaces, I have some friends who manage these things, and it's a challenge. It's going to be a real issue. But in essence, if you look at it, there's a lot of big changes, structural changes happening in the economy. But for the foreseeable future, is a cover from The Economist, and it kind of resonated with me that we're going to be in a 90% economy for a couple of years. So before we move to the next segment, sorry, one more. This is a really important one for me. We already know income inequality has been a big issue. We've been talking about universal basic income and things like that. Unfortunately, it's going to worse because who's getting impacted? Who's losing their assets? And so here's a chart that shows that for the top 1% of income earners, the income is 20-some percent, is get to the same age of the Gilded Age, the Great Gatsby. It's not good. This is not healthy for a capitalistic society. In fact, let me give you a very interesting math I did last night. And by the way, this is supported by what Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are saying, that I think the rich need to be taxed a little bit more. They need to, they're all saying. So presently, the top 1%, the average tax rate is 27%. And if you raise that by 10% to 37%, which is not super deadly, you can pay the bottom 20%, the poor, $9,000 annually more, which is 60% bump in this income. And if you look at the demographic of the bottom 20%, they're mostly not working and mostly old. They're living off of Social Security and so on and so forth. I'm not getting into tax policy and the politics of this, but I just want you to put in perspective that when we talk about these kind of things, what's this mean? Now, if you take the top 5% and do the same thing, that the money that was generated by taxing, and they only pay, top 5% pay average of 23% tax. If you put it to 33%, you can take the top 20% and you can more than double their income and get them out of the poverty. Okay, so that's the shape of the future. It gives you a sense of what's happening, what's good, what's bad. We're going to get into the personal part, but let's take a few questions here. So back to you, Michael.
Okay, thanks, PK. We've got a few questions. The first one here is from one of our in-person regulars, David Cohen. Hi, David. How would you adjust the reported layoff numbers to reflect the typically unreported self-employed and employees of smaller businesses? Could this explain the discrepancy between the applications for unemployment and the layoff numbers from one of your earlier slides, I think.
Yep, I agree. Those those numbers that you're seeing are underreported, no question. I mean, if you count all those people who are sorely hurt. But again, you have the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses that's keeping a lot of people employed. There's other loan provisions for small businesses. So there's a lot of other things that are happening at the Federal Reserve level, at the federal administration level, that's sort of keeping those people. But unquestionably, I agree with the statement that there's going to be undercounting. It's not underreporting, but it's just certainly undercounting, but they don't fall into the category of what the unemployment and layoff numbers indicate.
So another question on economic implications before we go to some closer to home for you, actually. So economic implications with regard to capitalism and the structure of the economy, perhaps also in reference to your last slide, but in general, do you see any major changes coming?
So if you follow the Gilded Age, well, it followed, a depression followed, massive stock market speculation followed, and that happens when people have excess money. I mean, what do you do with it? I mean, I'm just being very simplistic, folksy about this thing, and it's been historically proven that every time this distribution of income changes, and it'll put, there's no question of mind, that's going to put a lot of stress on the capitalist system as we know it. Now, can the policymakers intervene and bring some equity back into play? I don't know. I mean, that's the question, much more profound question. But I'm convinced that this is going to put over the next 4, 5, 6 years a huge amount of stress, and actually and people rebel. I mean, the pitchforks come out. I mean, it's just that simple.
Next question, this is right up your alley, PK, from David Bacnia. How strong is the impact of the pandemic on training and education, and how can we prepare better for the recovery?
Certainly, almost every single university in the country is seeing the financial impact. You're losing revenue on student revenue, on housing, on food. Universities are a fixed cost business. It's huge infrastructure, people work. So consequently, I think we'll see actually a significant number of shutdowns of universities. And the reason, so over the last 7 years, the average has been about one university, typically small liberal arts university in the Midwest or the Northeast, has been shutting down because their financial models were not supportive of the way these changes taking place. But there was still a large number of universities that are on the borderline, many nonprofit, many private ones. They'll see the hurt. They will see the hurt. But I think on the other hand, just being a part of UCSC and the UC system, I think we are adapting exceptionally well. I mean, by and large, the transition to remote instruction has gone on well. The faculty members have stepped up. The students have stepped up. And like I said, it's a structural change that's taking place. And I think in a year from now, we'll be having this conversation that maybe there are better models. I mean, the model of education that everybody talks about, the flip classroom, that, traditionally we go to the classroom for the lecture, and then we stay away for project work and other things. Why don't we flip it? Flip it means that you can watch the video for a lecture, but you go to places to collaborate, to do creative stuff. And I think it's going to expedite the flipped classroom model. But certainly, I fully expect all universities are going to, see a certain amount of financial pain. Unless you're a university that has $100 billion endowment, you can probably try to buy it. And even that in the transition, there's very interesting things happening where a lot of students are saying, I don't think the remote instruction has the same value as in-person instruction. So, but this is a transitional phase. I think we have to adapt the quality of instruction, and people get used to it. But you may have read about that. There's several class action lawsuits against UC about saying they want money back or something. So, but clearly, huge impact. I think from an extension standpoint, which is what I run, typically in downturn, a lot of people finally start to ask the question, I think I should worry about my skills. I should upskill myself for my next job or even be more secure in this job. So I think the professional education definitely picks up. There's no question about that.